What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Nick with Leverage Media, and welcome to another episode of Path to a Million podcast. I've got an interesting guest here today, my new friend, Joe Sanok, with the new book that he's written. It's called Thursday is the New Friday. Joe is a trained counselor, and he, I guess I shouldn't say counsel other counselors, but coaches other counselors on how to build, scale, and exit their practices. So I thought it would be useful to kind of get an outside perspective from the chiropractic world and see what we could learn from Joe. So Joe, say hello to the people and give them a little bit of background with you.
Nick, thank you so much for having me on the show. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm trained as a counselor and a psychologist. I had a private practice of my own from 2006 till 2019. We grew to 13 or so clinicians, and really that started as a side gig to my full-time job, and it just kept growing and eventually sold that in 2019. But in 2012, also started this podcast called the Practice of the Practice podcast. And I saw it really as a way to just learn publicly, to read a book and say, hey, this stuff about marketing and business I never learned in grad school. And so I'd read a book and then I'd talk about it on the podcast, or I'd interview someone and just ask questions that I had, which at the time, there was nobody that was really talking about private practices for counselors from a business standpoint. So from day one, I was the number one podcast for counselors. So that was helpful because there weren't any others at the time. And over time, whenever a new podcast would launch, they'd usually have me on the show and say, I listened to Joe for years and decided I'm going to finally launch my own show. And so over time, we've built membership communities. We've built kind of mastermind groups and a number of different products to help people from that moment that they say, oh, I want to start a private practice, all the way to they want to exit it and start a podcast and kind of go bigger, go more national. And kind of through that process, really just learned that a lot of the ways that I think about time and the way that I think about productivity is fairly unique. And I have some blueprints. And that's where the book came out of that, of just taking what I was teaching on a regular basis and saying, how would I put this into a book for the general business population?
Well, I'll tell you, I see a lot of similarities between the counselor world and the chiropractic world in that you go to school to like do the thing. And then when you get out and while you're learning how to do the thing, like no one's training you on how to market or how to run a business or how to hire or fire or any of that thing or any of that stuff. Now you get into the business and, it usually you start just bootstrapping it, getting it started and doing it yourself. And then eventually you kind of hit a ceiling. And I think you had mentioned before we hopped on that you kind of hit that ceiling. You were just like, I don't actually want to do this anymore. I love the business side of it. I like the marketing side of it. I like teaching other people, but I don't want to do that. So I think a lot of chiropractors kind of run into that same issue. What would be your recommendation for those that have kind of built themselves a job versus building themselves a business?
Yeah, I think a lot of people that are highly trained, like your audience and my audience, they feel all this sense of, hey, I went to school for all these years and now I have this business, but I don't really want to do that. And it's like, well, but I've done all this school. I have to do that. And when I realized I don't have to do psychology, I don't have to do counseling, I can do anything I want. That was really liberating for me to really ask the question of, do I like doing the actual counseling anymore? And there are some people that say, I always want to be a therapist. I always want to be a chiropractor. But the skills that we have also go well beyond the kind of particular area of either counseling or chiropractic. And so when we just look at how much the average chiropractor knows about general health and well-being, and imagine you were no longer able to actually have people come into your office. Like, how would you take your skill set and take that national? How would you take your skill set and turn that into e-courses or podcasts or, membership communities or retreats? There's so many ways when we start to say, okay, this is the box we were handed. And that was handed to us for a reason, and it's good overall. But do I want to stay inside of that box? Or do I want to start to say, I'd like to have a business that isn't just based on me always showing up? Because if we're the ones that are always showing up time and time again, that's not a business. That's a job you've given yourself. Maybe a really highly compensated job. But still, if when you go on vacation, you lose money, that's a problem. And so we want to try to figure out, how do you continue to build multiple streams of income within your business so that it's not completely dependent on you anymore?
Yeah. I would imagine counselors are similar in this way, in that you do the thing that the thing that I always disliked about when I was in practice is like what you just said. If I wanted to go on a vacation, there, like, no one was seeing the patients. And it's like, you could hire, for chiropractors, you can hire a locum, which is somebody who will come in and like cover your practice. But, you know, I never felt super comfortable with that. And so I would just end up not having patients or not going on vacation. Like I just told you, I just got back. This is my first full day back from a 3-week vacation. And that couldn't have happened without having set up the business in a way, both businesses in a way that they can function without me. And counselors, it sounds like they seem like they probably have a little bit more option to do things remotely. But in terms of like adjusting a patient, you physically have to be there. And you know, that's a problem. Now you can start you can try to get the other streams of income with digital products or, you know, coaching or things like that, where you could have a national or international basis. But if you're going to be doing chiropractic, somebody's got to do it. And usually that leads most offices into getting associates. You said that you had 13 providers in your practice at the time. Were they all independent contractors? Were they associates? How did that work?
Yeah, so they're here in Michigan, having 1099 contractors is really easy. There's a lot of states where that's not as easy, like California, Texas, Utah, New York, you know, depending on the employment law of the individual state. So in Michigan, it's very easy to have 1099 contractors, you know, assuming that you're following all the rules. You're not telling them their schedule. You're offering them some services, but that are support, but you're not really running the business for them. So really, I saw it as mental wellness counseling being the overall hub of promotion, that I'm the one that's out there getting business, and that they're also getting business for them as an individual. That they also had some flexibility in their schedule. Some of those folks were part-time, some of those were full-time, to really be able to say what's each individual contractor's kind of superpower for the mental health world, and to be able to kind of itemize, oh, you're a woman going through a transition, here's the 2 counselors that we have for you. Oh, you have a toxic family situation with alcoholism, here's the 1 or 2 counselors we had for you. So really being able to figure out outside of my own time, what are the services that were needed for the individual families that were coming into the practice.
What did you find was the best way of doing payments with those independent contractors? Because most chiropractors do associates, and I think it's more of like, I don't know, like chiropractors are just kind of odd like this, to where they really like want to like control the situation, and you don't see as many large independent contractor type buildings in chiropractic. So what were some of the benefits that you found to doing an independent contractor versus associate?
Yeah, I think for me, it was tax liability was part of it. To just be able to not worry about the onboarding costs of having a W-2 employee, or to have someone that I'm splitting the revenue with, that ultimately I was the owner, it wasn't a partner type of situation. I think also just in regards to flexibility, that if someone wasn't a fit, that it was very easy to change. Whereas if you have a partner or a W-2, you're then looking at all sorts of laws and rules around, you know, when you can fire, when you cannot fire, what you can fire for. So really, I wanted to have the agility to be able to have 1099 contractors. Now, if I was looking at it from a standpoint of selling the business, I think W-2s would have been much smarter to have that many W-2s, because when you sell a business and you have a bunch of contractors, you know, the other side is saying, well, sure, you have these contracts, but are all these people going to stay? They're not W-2 employees. And so from that standpoint, if my long-term goal was to sell the business, I think probably having W-2s would have been smarter. I think also when you look at percentage of how much comes in, usually W-2s actually cost you less, even though there's a lot more paperwork in regards to state taxes and, you know, federal taxes and all of that. So I wouldn't say that 1099s is the best situation in every situation. For what I wanted, which was simplicity, it definitely was, because when I set it all up, I had a full-time 40-hour-a-week job. This was my side gig. I'm bringing people in, and at a certain point, that side gig in 10 hours a week was making more money than my full-time gig. If I were to say, you know, I really want to own a counseling practice and keep moving forward with this and eventually be a silent owner that's very uninvolved, but then bring in an admin, I probably would have switched to a W-2 model just to make sure that people were more secure, that they had more longevity. I would have then made a higher profit as well in that situation too.
What was the financial arrangement with the 1099s?
Yeah, so with the 1099s, there were two phases. There was an onboarding phase and a full clinician phase. So the onboarding phase was where until they had their first, I think it was, I want to say $5,000 a month where they brought in 5K, they were at just a straight 50-50 split. Then when they got out of that phase, they permanently moved into full clinician phase. And that's where then at certain levels, it went from 50-50 for I think the first 1,000. Then the next 3,000, it was a 65-35. And then above that, it was a 75-25 split. So it kind of grew over time. But then I knew that I was covering the rent and the admin and all of the profits. It was a very simple formula for me. At the time, there weren't a lot of great options like Gusto or other payroll services. So I would sit down every single week and get the report from our finances and then just hand write a check. Now, that's not how I would set it up now. But at the time, again, it was for simplicity. It was, okay, they turn in their money, they get paid every single week. And so, I sold in 2019. So when I was setting up all of the kind of contractor side of things, that would have been 2010. So for me, it was, again, all about making it as easy for myself as possible to keep track of things, to hand it off to an admin, and to know kind of where the money was going in and out.
Interesting.
And we weren't billing insurance either. It was entirely private pay. And so that made it a lot easier too, where we didn't have to deal with an EHR that's, submitting for billing or keeping track of, we billed for this date, but then we didn't get paid till this date. So, if you have all those other variables, my model for that wouldn't necessarily work if you're not just pure private pay.
Yeah. It's an interesting model. Like I had a client that they had, I think it was 9 chiropractors. And like 3 of them were associates and 6 were independent contractors. And I just have always thought, I'm always surprised that there aren't more of those like that. And I just never really see them because so many chiropractors are wasting so much money on having large overhead. I mean, they're like in my town of 100,000 people, there's 80 plus chiropractors that are all paying the same overhead basically. And it's like, if some of them came together, they could save themselves quite a bit of money.
Yeah, even if they did a co-op model where, they're all sharing, say, a website and a space, and they, create some fair way of doing it if people want more time in that space, to just collectively bring their assets together to do marketing. You can still be your own businesses within a co-op model. You just can file, say, an LLC that oversees the whole thing, and everyone has, equal votes in or something like that. I mean, there's so many people that will just all be spinning their wheels when other folks have done this before, and like just go learn from them and work with them and pay the money to accelerate your growth.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of ways to get creative with this, and we've just kind of all fallen into the model that was handed to us, like you said. So I want to kind of quickly, it seems like the size of successful counseling practices is kind of similar to chiropractic practices. So I want to get your takes on the 4 stages of the path to $1 million. And then I really want to dive into the book because I'm fascinated by, working less and being more effective, and I'm terrible at it. So I'm interested to get the advice. So let's start with the 0 to 250,000 in collections in a year. What would be your advice to somebody who's in private practice starting from 0 and getting to that first level?
Yeah, I think during that startup phase, one of the big things that people often do is they wear multiple hats. And there's nothing wrong with that. You learn a lot, the back end. Time usually is on your side where you're not full enough that it really makes sense to have a huge staff that's supporting you. But I do think that starting with, what are the things that that you're bad at? And so are you bad at bookkeeping? Do you feel like collections and paying attention to numbers is something that you can do really well? Or is it something that maybe you can't do that well? So really thinking through the lens of scalability, that the systems you set up in that first 200K are going to be the ones that most likely you either continue doing or you have to undo at some point. Mm-hmm. And so if you think through, all right, say I get 500K worth of people, am I going to be able to continue to use the system I'm signing up for? So that thing that costs $19 a month, maybe the other thing that's $29 a month is going to help you scale faster, and you're going to have less to undo. I think also during that first 250K, really thinking through creating as much content for SEO that you can during that time. So taking some time to write 26 plus blog posts about different aspects of chiropractic that are your specialty. And then, having half a year's worth of content, that's going to serve you over the next 5 or 10 years to have all those internal links and external links. And then the last thing I would really recommend, especially because time is on your side when you're first getting started, is to make as many media and community contacts as possible. Local media is always looking for people to weigh in on different things. And if you can make those connections early in your career, it's really helpful later on. So I remember I was asked once when I worked for a nonprofit to go do a radio interview to help with fundraising around this program we were starting, where kids got to go sailing and then do therapy on the sailboat. And I did therapy on the sailboat with these kids. And so I met, this Mary in the morning and, her sidekick, and I go do this interview. And after we were done, I said, I have lots of skills around kind of counseling and psychology. And I don't know if you have kind of a regular contributor, but here's just like 5 ideas of what we could talk about. And I said, and I just threw out titles like the 5 things that parents should know about their teenagers that they don't know. The 3 things that every teen girl wants their parents to know, but they really don't know. 5 ways to stop a tantrum in its tracks. And so I just made up these titles right then. And this lady said, why don't you come every Tuesday morning and I'll have you on the radio. I just assumed that this radio personality had a psychologist that would come in and talk, and she didn't. Right. And so that for years was something I did and was on the radio totally for free. It took an hour of my time, 15 minutes there, half an hour on, 15 minutes to my office. And for years, I was on this radio station. So making those connections early on is really important.
Yeah, I love that one. That next stage, that 250 to 500, I think this is where a lot of chiropractors start to, the wheels start to come off a little bit because they start to get busier. They can't do all the things, and then balls start getting dropped. So what's your recommendation to go to that $500,000 level?
Yeah, so that 0 to 250 is usually about wearing multiple hats and time is on your side. And 250 to 500 is the exact opposite. It's aggressively taking those hats off. And this is often really hard for those owners because they've lived such a bootstrap mentality oftentimes. And then, things start clicking along and they're like, well, I know I can do it. It'll take me 5 minutes to do this thing. But that 5 minutes that you spend doing some billing or doing a follow-up phone call or even just handwriting something for a client, if that were a system, over time, that 5 minutes adds up and you could fit in another 15-minute client, another half-hour client, those higher-end clients. So understanding just the basic worth of every minute of your time is so important at that phase because almost always it's worth it to continue to build the team that can support you, even down to saying, hey, I need you to send this email to someone. Hey, why don't you talk on the way out with Jess at the front desk? She'll be able to help you with that. Here's a note for your primary care doctor. Hand this to the front desk. They'll take care of it for you. Every little minute that you can save of your own is more billable hours for you. As well as you're aggressively taking off those hats, finding those ancillary areas where you can start to bring people in. So it could be that you bring a massage therapist in. It could be that you bring in a nutritionist. It could be that you bring in, another chiropractor to help out. Finding these other services that you can offer then starts to bring in money outside of your own time, but then uses your space effectively. Because I imagine similar to therapists, the average chiropractor probably isn't using their office from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. every single day of the week. They probably, if they looked at the actual time that they're filling up their office, they probably could have quite a few other people using that office when they're not in there. And so starting to really evaluate and doing a space audit and understanding when space is used, when is most popular, when is least popular, should we even be open on Fridays because people aren't coming in, or maybe they are. Maybe we hire someone that can do chiropractic on Saturdays and Sundays because that's when we keep getting requests. So starting to observe where are the areas of potential growth that are outside of your own time.
Yeah, no, I like that. On the next step, the 500 to 1 million, I feel like this is really where the scale comes into play. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that we assume that everyone thinks like us. And so, as entrepreneurs that also happen to be highly skilled in mental health or in chiropractic, we think the world thinks this way, but they don't. And so there may be tons of chiropractors out there that would love to show up, do the work, get paid well, and go home. They don't want to build a private practice. They don't want to build marketing. They don't want to think SEO. They don't want to think about leases or any of that. They just want to show up and do good work. And so really the switch from $500,000 to $1 million is removing yourself as much as possible from the business. And so we see this all the time with therapists too, where they say, no one can do it like I do it. That may be true, but if that's actually true, we need to be charging 2 or 3 times more than what we were charging before. And then we need to bring in an army of people that can do it somewhat like you do it. So you become the premium product. You maybe are only in there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you hustle, you do a great job, but you're charging 2 or 3 times more than what you used to. And then you bring in this army of ancillary staff, either other chiropractors, other massage therapists, nutritionists, people that you can build out these systems so that it's not based entirely on your time. Like if people are going to get to $1 million a year, you really have to be thinking about how you remove yourself and replace yourself more than saying you're just going to work harder. Sure, you could get to $1 million just working harder, but you're going to be dead. And then when we think about, okay, the burnout rate, like if you end your career 15 years earlier than you should have, like that's a huge hit to your family's income. That's a huge hit to your community. I would much rather see you just come in a couple days a week and then build out an entire army within your actual business to serve people and to make sure that those referrals from the past are actually staying in-house.
Yeah. I've always thought to myself, and I never really see people doing this. What you said was, if you do want to stay in practice, like make it hurt a little bit if they really have to see you. Like when I stopped seeing patients, it was very early on. I was not seeing like a high volume of people. And so it was pretty easy for me to step away. There were a couple of people that were like, oh, I really want to still see you, but it just wasn't even an option. They just like had to see the associates, and they all were fine once they got into the rhythm of seeing them. And no one asks for me now. Like no one knows that I exist, you know? So it's like, once you get over that first like 6 months or a year, you realize that everybody's fine with whoever has replaced you. But if you really do want to make yourself available to you, like charge a premium. My girlfriend is an attorney, which is probably a little bit more similar to counselor because they're getting paid for their time. And I told her, I'm like, you have to get 2 tiers of attorney pricing. Like you need to charge a lot more, and you need to keep, for the people that like price is an issue, you've got, you know, the $250, $275 an hour person. That way you can start to limit how much you have to do of your time. Because right now it's like her and the attorneys are basically billing the same amount, and she's killing herself doing 11, 12, 13 hours of billable hours a day. And I'm just like, that's not sustainable. So
not at all. Well, and I remember one guy I talk about in the book, his name's Jerry. He owns a counseling practice in Orange County, and he did a pre-consulting call with me, and his wife was on the call. And in the pre-consulting call, figuring out if he was going to do consulting, his wife said, if Jerry continues at this pace, he's going to have a heart attack. And he signed up for consulting. And between that pre-consulting call and our first session 2 weeks later, he had a heart attack. And so for him, it became very real what that stress looked like. And so we stopped and we just said, you know, Jerry, what's something that to you represents living a better life? And he said, honestly, if I could just go snowboarding every Wednesday, he lived about an hour away from the mountains. And he was just like that. If I could figure out the systems to go snowboarding every Wednesday, my life would be different. Yeah. I said, okay, let's do that. And what was great is by picking that thing that he loved, snowboarding, we could reverse engineer all the things it would take. Well, why don't you do this? Well, I take most of the intake phone calls still. And I want to screen every single person coming into this gigantic multi-million-dollar practice. Yeah. Okay. Well, could you train someone to take all those calls just for the snowboarding day? So he trained that person just for Wednesday, knowing that when he goes and snowboards, he's going to be like, okay, they did it fine on Wednesday. Why don't they do it every day of the week? Right. What information would you need from that person to feel really good about it? Okay, here's the kind of top tier people that I'm scared are going to get a bad referral within the clinic. So let's make a list of if someone's suicidal, if someone has an eating disorder, if someone has high anxiety or has had a hospitalization. Jerry always wants to hear about that person. He wants to each morning have a dashboard of the top clients coming in and make sure he has a little bit of say. So he's taking these things that for him used to be hours every single day, and pulling it down to a 10-minute like call or in-person talk with his assistant, looking at that dashboard.
Yeah.
And then over time, you see that he starts to get addicted to not working as much. He raises his fees significantly above the market. He's only in there a couple days a week now. And then his practice explodes because he got out of his own way. And the systems now can be the thing that actually grows and builds the business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is, once people start to figure that out, that they need to create the life that they want and start from there and kind of reverse engineer, that's where things start to get a whole lot more interesting. So once they get to $1 million and they want to stay above $1 million, and however much they want to grow to multi-million, or if they just want to kind of stay there, what do you think is what have you seen from the most successful offices that you've worked with that really allowed them to thrive at that stage?
Yeah, when we work with multi-million-dollar practices, they usually do one of two things. They either kind of double down in their own community to expand, and you want to do some market research to see if your community can handle that large of a practice. There are certain practices that will hit a saturation point in a community. So they'll either expand within the community and have maybe multi-sites or one really large site within a community, or they'll have satellite campuses around the local community. So looking at where the most number of people coming from that are outside of your particular area, and it may be an hour away, it may be, an hour and a half away. Finding those specific locations where you can test out a market, where you can maybe rent an office for 6 months or a year to test out that market, to add that satellite campus, send someone that's from your main campus to train people there. So you're then replicating your model. And then doing that kind of throughout your state. I'd say that's where we really see people start to get to the multi-millions or, the 8-figure practices.
But the only way you can do that is having super strong systems, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a hands-on business. If we want to really scale, then that's where we need to move into things that are less needed for people's particular time in person. And so adding things like e-courses, adding things like podcasts, adding things like a membership community, that's where you start to be able to scale beyond that one-on-one work or the small group work, where you can say, okay, we have all these people that are dealing with work stress, and they're coming in for chiropractic, and we're noticing, if they just had an ergonomics assessment from an occupational therapist, that would just solve everything. So maybe you then hire an OT that's going to go out into businesses, and then you see what those businesses say they need. And they say, oh, we want more workplace trainings for our HR. And you allow your own audience to dictate where you're going to head in regards to the types of business that you're going to develop over time. I think the average counselor in my case, or chiropractor in your case, just sticks with that typical model. Whereas if you say, okay, I'm going to let my own people say, hey, I'm stressed out with parenting, I would love to have you have some sort of membership community that's, run between a chiropractor and a therapist around parenting and de-stress and mindfulness. That's probably going to help people with their outcomes in chiropractic. But that could totally be run outside of yourself. That could be, a chiropractic assistant, and it could be a therapist that you hire that gets a percentage of income, and that's completely outside of you. So I would say that the multi-site campus, that would be following that kind of traditional model of a private practice. If we're talking about getting to that 7 figures and going above that, if we're really looking at scaling beyond individual work, that's where those really creative, kind of non-typical and scalable types of things is where people get there quicker.
Gotcha. When you talk about multiple practices, one issue that I see some chiropractors fall into is they build up their main office, and they definitely are not like fully optimized and running that at full capacity. And then they start to shift their focus to another office. Do you see that happen where people want to like move into a second location too quickly? And if so, like what would be your advice on like when to start that second practice?
Yeah, because what often happens is people put all that focus into the second location, and they assume the first location's just kind of kicking it. And they don't have any KPIs, any key performance indicators. They have no sense of dashboard or check in with that office so they can catch the fires as they're starting to light up. Right. And so I would say you want to really be clear on what information you need from the first practice to know if things are clicking along, and having a couple point people in a few different areas. So one person that's reporting out on money, one that's reporting out on customer satisfaction, one that's talking about the culture of the office. Because if you're not there, that's fine, assuming that you have a good sense of what's going on there. The problem again is that if it's all based on you showing up and you making everyone feel good and patting them on the back and all of that, that's still your own time. And sure, maybe you're making more per hour because you're not doing the actual hands-on work, but it's still your own time. And so finding those creative ways to level up and to know those particular dashboards so that you know what's going on where without you having to run around town, I think that's where we see it's more effective than if people just keep adding practices, but then they kind of lose control of the whole thing.
Is there anything that you recommend to people where they like hit certain levels, or like what do you tell them that they should be doing before they even start thinking about a second practice?
I mean, to me, I would say throughout, you want to be limiting your amount of time that you're working on your practices. I don't teach people how to work 50-hour work weeks. I don't think that's good for your own stress, nor do I think it's good for your family, your friends, or your health. So from the very beginning, I say limit the amount of time you'll work on the practice, because we know that if you allow your brain to relax, if we allow you to have that downtime, you're going to do more creative and focused work. And so the best work is going to rise to the top, and then you're going to drop the ball on the other things. And that's going to give you really important information as to what you need to be outsourcing. So I say throughout, you want to be challenging yourself to work fewer and fewer hours. So if you're in that 0 to 250K, like really say, I'm not going to work more than 40 hours. I'm not going to work more than 4 days a week. I'm going to focus on getting that all into 4 days and then allow my brain to calm down. When you're above that 250, to say, I'm going to work 3.5 days a week, and I'm going to force myself to do fewer hours so that I get good information on what I should be outsourcing. You're naturally going to be moving towards the best use of your time when you limit your time that you're spending in the office. So say you say 3.5 days a week, that's all I'm going to do when I'm between 250 and 500. What are you going to do in those 3.5 days? You're probably going to have really fast, effective team meetings. So instead of that hour meeting where everyone's talking and chit-chatting, it's going to be like, Joe's coming into the office for 15 minutes. We're going to tear through these agenda items. He's going to move on to other things. Great. Awesome. Let's get that done. You're probably going to focus on doing as many chiropractic appointments as possible during that time. You're going to cut the fat in as many areas as possible because you know that you're there only 3.5 days. And so the more that you can see every minute that you're going slow or that you're not effective at the office as time you're stealing from yourself, from your family, from your social life, I'm stealing money and time from my family if I'm just dinking around at work. I should be getting as much done in the shortest period of time so that I can go play Mario Kart with my daughters and not feel guilty about it.
Right. Well, that's a perfect segue into your book. Thursday is the new Friday. So talk a little bit about like how did you come up with the idea? Kind of what's the premise, and then let's get into some of the advice.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting is sometimes in your career it's sort of a trajectory that keeps building on itself, and other times it's like a return to home. My freshman year at college, I remember being at the orientation, and the academic advisor said to the small group of students, "All right, now it's time to make your schedule for the fall." And I raised my hand and said, "Do I have to go to class on Friday?" And she said, "No, it's college. You do whatever you want." You know, I'm coming from the high school mindset of Monday through Friday. And so I'm like, I'm not going to go to class on Friday. That sounds ridiculous. So I scheduled a 4-day work week for myself. And throughout all of undergrad and grad school, I had a 4-day work week, except for one semester when there was one class that only met Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so by doing that, I felt like I got so much more done and then could relax, so much more over the weekends. Even my first job, I negotiated to have a 4-day work week out of grad school. I didn't realize that was something people didn't do. I just thought, like, I only want to work 4 days. Like, why not just negotiate that when they ask if I want to, get hired? And so then I got into my career, started doing the 40-hour work week, private practice, podcast, working 50 plus hours a week. So when I left my full-time job to go back to just doing my private practice in 2015, that first summer, I said, this is my calendar again. I'm going to take Fridays off and just see what happens for the summer. I'm going to do an experiment. And that's a big concept in the book, is that you are smart enough to do experiments and to adapt what we're talking about to your particular situation. This isn't one of those books that's prescriptive, like the industrialists want us to say, here's the 5 tips, you're either in or out. No, this is teaching you to think and apply it to your own world so that you can adjust and change over time. So I did this experiment, and in the fall, saw that every single month had been the best month ever for the practice and for my Practice the Practice podcast. So I kept doing that 4-day work week. And so over time, I started teaching a number of these counselors and therapists I was working with, and discovered that what I was teaching, I thought it was just normal, but really it was unique. And so in working with a writing coach, she helped me really sort through what are the things I've learned in business that are kind of other people's content that I'm regurgitating, and what's the unique kind of thing that I'm teaching. And really the 4-day work week and how I view time was the thing that we found that I was teaching that was much different from the rest of the industry, and then was able to look at the research studies and the brain research and why it actually works, and get a bunch of case studies together.
That's great. So you had said, I think there were 3 kind of constructs that you based the book around. Am I right on the 3?
Yeah.
Okay. What are the 3 that they kind of fall under?
Yeah. So the first part of the book, we really look at time and kind of our inner world. And so I got the book contract with HarperCollins, and then started with a blank whiteboard and just said, if I was starting from scratch, talking about the 4-day work week, what questions would I have? And the first one was, how did we even get the 7-day week? How did we get the 40-hour work week? Like, where did that even come from? Because if we don't know where we've been, it's hard to know kind of where we're going, and to see that trajectory of humanity from a really macro standpoint. And so I started researching it, and actually several thousand years ago, the Babylonians made up the 7-day week. They looked up and they saw the sun, the moon, they saw Earth, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. So 7 major celestial things. And they said, we should have a 7-day week. So they did. The Romans had a 10-day week. The Egyptians had an 8-day week. So if we just start with this thing that we see as so true, the 7-day week is completely made up by the Babylonians. We could just as easily have a 5-day week and have 73 of those in a year. So then fast forward to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the average person was working 10 to 14 hours a day. They were really working a farmer's schedule, even if they weren't a farmer. So then in 1926, when Henry Ford introduces the 40-hour work week at Ford, and it was really to sell more cars to his own employees. He knew that people did not need to get to work faster or want to get to work faster, but if they had a weekend, then they would definitely buy a car to then go do that weekend faster. So it worked. He sold a ton of cars to Ford employees. So less than 100 years ago, this white dude from Detroit gave us the 40-hour work week. So again, this thing that we hold true as being so solid, it was just made up less than 100 years ago. So now let's fast forward to the pandemic of 2020. We globally have this kind of worldwide research project of deconstructing work. Do we still think like the industrialists, where people are just machines, that they're part of a conveyor belt? No, we deconstructed that years ago. But the way we work continues to be like how Henry Ford taught us, which at the time was a giant step forward for humanity, but we've outgrown that. So now as the post-pandemic generation, we get to decide, are we going to continue to move forward in that particular area? So that's part one. We really dive into time, and then we start looking internally at our internal inclinations.
What do you, I mean, maybe we get into this in the second or the third part, but I will see kind of like a news headline kind of pop through every once in a while that's like, this huge company in Switzerland, tried the 4-hour work week and happiness went up 80% or whatever. Is all of the research that has ever been done on 4-day work weeks, is it all as positive as it seems like it is? Or is there ever one where it's just like, well, the productivity actually went down when they went to the 4-day work week?
Sure. I definitely can't speak to all of the research because I've not read all of the research, but what we're seeing emerge is that there are some really huge studies that are being done across multiple variables that are pointing to productivity going up. So the largest one to date is the Iceland study, which had 2,500 people across multiple industries, and it was a multi-year study. So the problem with a lot of the old studies was, it's one department in Microsoft Japan that did it and they were successful. Great. Microsoft Japan did it. But what's great about the Iceland study, and the timing for my book, honestly, was that it was across multi-years in multiple dimensions. So it wasn't just, school teachers. It wasn't just business people. It was across multiple industries. And so we saw that in that study, productivity went up. We saw happiness go up, health outcomes go up. We're seeing this in a number of different areas too. Spain, Portugal, and New Zealand are all doing 4-day work weeks to test that out. Next year, Kickstarter is moving to that in 2022. Like I said, Microsoft Japan. But, I love hearing the stories of the non-big companies. So Kalamazoo Valley Community College down in Southwest Michigan. It was probably 5 years ago.
Home of Derek Jeter.
home of Derek Jeter. Got to weave that in. So Derek Jeter's hometown. This guy, Ted Forrester, he is an HVAC instructor there. So he's teaching heating and cooling in big units. He starts to notice that in the summer on Fridays, there's like nobody on campus. So he goes up to the roof of the building because he has, the keys to everything. He's taking pictures of the parking lot all summer long and then compares that to students in the fall on Fridays. He takes that to the board and says, here's what Fridays have looked like all summer long. And then he says, here's how much it costs in just air conditioning empty buildings for a summer. And they say, what do you think we should do? And he had a whole PowerPoint like ready to go. He plugs it in, and it's all about why the entire college should switch to a 4-day work week in the summertime. And they end up doing a test year, and they've done it ever since, where the office staff, all of the staff work a 36-hour summer. They can flex it pretty much however they want, Monday through Thursday. They've noticed that their productivity outcomes have gone up. They've noticed their health outcomes have gone up. Student outcomes have gone up because students then can come in earlier in the day or later in the day. And retention. You think about who wants to leave a job that in Michigan, which is beautiful in the summertime, you're giving up a 4-day work week. As well, they've saved millions in air conditioning costs. And so I think over time, we're going to see more and more of these experiments be done. We're actually tracking them and posting them on my website, joesanok.com, where anybody can submit their experiments that they try so that we can learn from each other what works in different industries and what doesn't. But overall, it seems to be a positive trajectory in regards to the research pointing to the 4-day work week being attainable and better for society within our generation.
So I've got, I have 2 associates right now. And when I hire my 3rd associate, which hopefully will be soon, so if anybody's listening and wants to come work at my office, let me know. But when I go to the 3rd associate, I'm gonna flex all 3 of them into 4-day work weeks, and each one of them will just have a different off day during the week. So like one will be off Tuesday, one will be off Wednesday, one will be off Thursday. That way, there's still availability for the community to come in and get adjusted, but the actual providers themselves will only be working 4 days a week. Do you think that there's a difference between the way that I'm thinking about doing it, in that the people will be working 4 days a week, but the office itself will be open 5? Do you think that that's any different than just being like, we're only open Monday through Thursday and we're off on Friday?
No, I think what you're describing is the evolutionary nature of business right now. That the industrialists wanted us to create a machine that applied to everybody. That this is the way everyone should work this way. What you're doing is you're saying, well, let's try something, see how it works, and then learn from it. Check in with the providers and see how it's working. Check in with our clients. That's the evolutionary nature of business now. And I think that what you're talking about, as long as you're checking in with your providers and seeing if your clients are enjoying it, that's perfect. What I would say is don't just set it and forget it, though. That's the industrialist. That's saying we're setting up the machine and we're going to leave it. What if we see that you need to have 3 providers on Thursdays or on Fridays or on one of the days that it's off? We need to have that agility to kind of change, to survey our clients, to survey incoming people, to survey our staff, to make sure that we can have adjustments to it over time to make it more effective.
Yeah. Well, my thinking with each one of them being off on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday is that Mondays and Fridays are our by far busiest days. But then if like somebody wanted to go on a 3-day weekend, it's like, all right, well, that's your day off this week, and you'll just work the Tuesday that you normally would have off. Or if it's Memorial Day or Labor Day, okay, let's just flex everybody back to Tuesday through Friday. So it just seems like it would allow us a lot more flexibility. We'd be able to open earlier. We'd be able to stay open later. We'd be able to offer Saturday hours. Because right now everybody works 8 to 6 with a 2-hour lunch. And the problem is like, if everybody's working Monday through Friday, 8 to 6, it's tough to ask anybody to come in earlier, stay later, work on Saturdays. When there's 3 or 4 of them, they could cycle the Saturdays, one a month, and be open at 7 in the morning, stay open until 7 p.m. We'd be able to service a lot more new patients, people that work weird schedules. And so I just think that it offers a lot more opportunity for the doctors as well as the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm glad that you think that I've got such a great idea.
Yeah.
Right. So
the other side of it, though, that I would encourage you is to encourage your staff to genuinely slow down when they're not working. One thing I encourage people to do is to add one thing to your weekend that's going to really help you boost your happiness. So it could be, I need to read for 2 hours a weekend and just like get away from my kids. I need to go for a hike with, my family. I need to, go for a run. Find that thing that you add into your weekend. And then what's the thing you're going to subtract from your weekend? So that could be, hey, I have a coffee date scheduled with this toxic friend of mine. And every time I leave, I feel like trash. I give you permission to not do that. Maybe outsource your lawn mowing or your grocery shopping. Those things are so easy now. So to add just one thing and remove one thing, I think when staff are encouraged to do that and to report it publicly and say, hey, this weekend I went for a hike and I just feel so much more prepared to be in here. And I removed this from my schedule. That add one, remove one is just so effective in creating a culture that slows down in order to speed up.
Got it. One other question before we move on to part two. Do you find that or do you have an opinion on whether it matters if it's like a Friday off or like a day during the week off?
I don't think it really matters. I think we're going to want to make sure that we understand kind of the depth of what people need and what they want when we're talking about the, there's flexibility there for sure.
Hey guys, Nick here. Actually, our conversation with Joe was going so well that we ran out of the time that we had scheduled for our interview. And so we had to break the interview into 2 parts. This will be the end of part 1. Be sure to tune in next week to get the second part of the interview. Lots of value. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it so far, and hopefully you'll continue to get some value on the next part.